boardroom was thick, not with the heat of the afternoon sun, but with the heavy, electric tension that precedes a storm. A group of professionals sat around a polished mahogany table, their eyes darting between their notes and the figure at the head of the room. This figure, a leader who had spent years climbing the ranks of the corporate ladder in the American continent, felt a familiar itch at the back of their throat. It was the urge to fill the silence, the desperate need to provide an answer, a critique, or a final definitive word on the project at hand. The silence was a vacuum, and like nature itself, this leader abhorred a vacuum. They believed, perhaps erroneously, that their value was measured by the volume and frequency of their speech. As they opened their mouth to speak, the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't just a physical movement, it was a subtle withdrawal of the collective energy in the room. This phenomenon is one that occurs in countless settings across the globe, from the high-stakes environments of English financial districts to the burgeoning startups of Latin America. It is the moment when a leader's greatest asset, their voice, threatens to become their greatest liability. The narrative of success is often written in the bold strokes of speeches and proclamations, yet there is a hidden, more profound story told in the moments when a leader chooses to say nothing at all. The weight of a single word can tip the scales of a career, and the inability to recognize the power of silence is a flaw that has dismantled empires and fractured families alike. Every thought, every action, and every word spoken throughout a lifetime serves as a preparation for the leadership role one eventually assumes. But for many, the most difficult lesson to learn is not how to speak with authority, but how to master the profound art of restraint. The hook that keeps a team engaged is often not the promise of a brilliant new idea, but the respect found in a leader who knows when the stage is no longer theirs. As the leader at the head of the table prepared to deliver a critique that had been brewing in their mind, the subtle tension in the room offered a warning. The question was not whether they had something to say, but whether saying it would build the future they envisioned or inadvertently begin to tear it down. Leadership is a multifaceted gem, reflecting different lights depending on the angle from which it is viewed. It exists in the quiet guidance of a volunteer group leader in a small European town, in the frantic but focused energy of a youth sports coach on a dusty field, and in the high-pressure decisions of a CEO managing a multinational conglomerate. Whether the stage is a humble family dinner table or the grand hall of a global summit, the fundamental principles remain remarkably consistent. The world is currently facing a crisis of leadership, a void that is felt in the halls of government where focus is lost and mandates are left incomplete. It is felt in the corporate sector, where the complexity of modern competition leaves management teams struggling to find solid ground. It is even felt in the sacred spaces of communities and the intimate corners of the home, where scandals and strife remind everyone of what happens when leadership fails. In this broader landscape, the voice of the leader acts as a beacon, but a beacon that is too bright or constantly flashing can blind as easily as it can guide. The environment in which a leader operates, be it the structured hierarchy of a bank or the fluid, creative space of a technological startup, demands a sophisticated understanding of communication. Words carry a specific gravity, they are the currency of influence. In the American continent, much like in England or Spain, the cultural expectation often leans toward the charismatic, outspoken leader, the individual who can command a room with a single sentence. However, this expectation masks a deeper truth about human connection and organizational health. The foundation of any successful venture is built on trust, and trust is frequently eroded not by what is left unsaid, but by the careless overflow of unnecessary speech. The central tension that drives every narrative of leadership is the struggle between the ego's desire for visibility and the mission's need for clarity. As the world watches, leaders are tested daily on their ability to navigate this landscape. The question that hangs in the air, whether in a quiet office or a loud factory floor, is how a leader can maintain their influence without becoming the source of the very noise they are trying to manage. The context of leadership is not just the role one holds, but the echoes one leaves behind in the minds of those they lead. In the center of this narrative stands the archetype of the always talkative leader. This is a person who perceives silence as a weakness, a blank space that must be filled with their own ideas, opinions, and observations. They are often characterized by an underlying anxiety, a fear that if they are not heard, they are not leading. This character might be the manager who feels compelled to criticize a colleague for a 3-minute delay, or the supervisor who treats every interaction as an opportunity to demonstrate their intellectual superiority. They are the ones who insist on having the last word in every debate, even when the discussion has already reached a natural and productive conclusion. On the other side of this dynamic are the collaborators, the employees, and the family members, the people whose own voices are often stifled by the overwhelming presence of the leader's speech. The conflict is not necessarily one of malice, but of a fundamental misunderstanding of the leader's role. A leader who speaks too much begins to alienate their surroundings. They lose the ability to listen, and in doing so, they lose the pulse of their organization. The internal struggle for such a leader is often a battle with their own habits. They might believe they are being helpful, being honest, or simply keeping things moving, but the reality for those on the receiving end is quite different. They feel undervalued, over-criticized, and ultimately demotivated. This tension is further complicated by the reality of hierarchy. As one ascends the ladder, the impact of their words is magnified. A casual comment from a person in a position of power does not land with the same weight as a comment from a peer. It carries the force of a command, the sting of a formal reprimand, or the weight of a definitive judgment. In the halls of power in England or across the vast corporate landscapes of Latin America, the realization that words have become more potent often comes too late. The story begins to move when the leader encounters the first signs of this alienation: the averted eyes in a meeting, the reluctance of the team to share new ideas, or the growing coldness in a previously warm relationship. It is here that the concept of self-leadership becomes paramount, as the individual must confront the possibility that their most used tool, their voice, is the very thing holding them back from true excellence. As the narrative unfolds, the stakes begin to rise, revealing that the cost of excessive speech is far higher than mere social awkwardness. The friction generated by a leader who cannot stay silent begins to wear down the machinery of the entire organization. Consider the manager who uses humor as a shield or a weapon, making jokes at the expense of others under the guise of building rapport. In the moment, it may seem like a minor infraction, but in the long term, it creates a culture of insecurity where no one feels safe to be authentic. The tension mounts as the leader continues to push their opinions, seemingly unaware of the growing resentment beneath the surface. The conceptual stakes are raised when we consider the ripple effect of leadership speech. In the American continent, where the culture of straight talk is often prized, the line between being direct and being destructive is frequently blurred. A leader who feels the need to comment on every aspect of a subordinate's life, from their appearance to their personal choices, is not leading. They are overstepping. This behavior signals a lack of respect for the boundaries that allow professional and personal relationships to thrive. The narrative momentum picks up as we see the consequences of this behavior manifesting in tangible ways. Talented individuals begin to look for the exit, their creativity withered by constant, unnecessary critique. The leader, meanwhile, finds themselves increasingly isolated, surrounded by people who will only tell them what they want to hear because the cost of honest dialogue has become too high. The early friction of a few awkward meetings has now evolved into a systemic failure of communication. The mounting tension reaches a critical point where the leader must decide whether to continue on their current path or to embrace a radical shift in their approach. This phase of the story highlights the paradox of power. The more authority one has, the more restraint one must exercise. Every word is a brick in the wall being built between the leader and those they serve. The question is no longer just about the content of the words, but about the very intent behind them. Is the leader speaking to empower, or are they speaking to dominate? The answer to that question will determine the trajectory of their leadership and the ultimate fate of their mission. Deep within the exploration of this leadership journey, we find that the most successful leaders, the ones who leave a lasting, positive legacy, have mastered the internal alchemy of thought and expression. They understand that before a word is ever spoken, it must pass through a rigorous internal filter. They ask themselves, will this make the person feel better? Will it contribute to their growth? Or am I merely trying to prove a point? This reflective process is what separates the impulsive manager from the wise mentor. In the home region or in global centers of commerce, the ability to pause is a mark of true maturity. This part of the narrative explores the emotional texture of these interactions. Imagine a leader who has just received a piece of frustrating news. Their instinct is to lash out, to find someone to blame, to vent their irritation through sharp, stinging words. But the disciplined leader takes a different path. They recognize the impulse, acknowledge the emotion, but then they choose silence. They might decide to wait a day to sleep on the matter, realizing that the heat of the moment is the worst time to make a definitive statement. This development in character is not just about avoiding conflict. It's about preserving the dignity of everyone involved. The dialogue in this phase of the story is often internal, a third-person observation of the mental gymnastics required to stay quiet. It's a vivid portrayal of the self-control that defines excellence. The leader begins to see that by offering fewer critiques and more well-timed praise, they can transform the energy of their team. They learn that their silence provides space for others to step up, to solve problems, and to find their own voices. The thematic symbol of the draft, the email saved but not sent, the comment thought but not voiced, becomes a powerful tool for growth. It represents the space between reaction and response, the very space where leadership lives. This realization marks a subtle but profound shift in the narrative's tone. The leader is no longer just a person in charge. They are becoming a person of influence, one who understands that the strongest messages are often delivered through the quietest channels. However, the journey toward mastery is never a straight line, and new complications inevitably arise. Even as the leader begins to understand the value of silence, they are tested by the complexity of modern communication. It is no longer just about the spoken word, it is about the digital echo. The ease with which an email can be sent or a message posted in a group chat creates a new frontier for the old habit of impulsive speech. A leader might find themselves in the middle of a digital dispute, where the temptation to have the last word is amplified by the anonymity and speed of the keyboard. The contradiction deepens. As the leader tries to be more restrained in person, they may find their old impulses leaking into their digital correspondence. This creates a new layer of conflict, as a poorly worded email can be shared, archived, and analyzed in ways a spoken word never could. The stakes are pushed further as the leader realizes that a single click can undo months of progress in building trust. They are tested by the urge to defend their reputation or to correct a perceived slight in a public forum. The unresolved tension here lies in the gap between the speed of technology and the slowness of wisdom. The narrative reflects on the danger of the instant response. In the American continent or in Europe, the culture of real-time communication puts immense pressure on leaders to be constantly available and constantly vocal. The complication is that this expectation is often at odds with the need for thoughtful, measured leadership. The leader is pushed to their limit as they face a situation where silence might be misinterpreted as weakness or inaction. They must navigate the delicate balance of knowing when to speak up to defend their team and when to remain silent to allow a situation to resolve itself. The conflict is no longer just internal. It is a battle against the very pace of the modern world. The narrative reaches a peak of tension as the leader stands at the precipice of a major decision, knowing that their choice of words or their choice of silence will have immediate and irreversible consequences for their future and the future of those they lead. The approach to the climax is marked by a palpable sense of mounting pressure. The leader finds themselves in a situation of high stakes, perhaps a major organizational change, a public crisis, or a deep personal conflict within their team. In this moment, the weight of their previous habits and their newly acquired insights collide. The atmosphere is charged with the inevitability of a confrontation. The leader is aware that the eyes of everyone, from the junior staff in the home region to the stakeholders in distant cities, are fixed upon them. They are at a turning point where the decision to speak or remain silent is no longer a matter of personal style, but a matter of professional survival and moral integrity. The pacing of the narrative slows down, focusing on the minute details of the leader's internal state. They feel the words forming, the arguments sharpening, the desire to win the moment pulsating in their mind. But they also feel the weight of the lessons learned. The memory of alienated colleagues, the sting of past mistakes, and the profound realization that their words have more power than they ever imagined. The intensity builds as they prepare to enter the room where the final discussion will take place. The stakes are crystallized. If they speak impulsively, they might win the argument but lose the team. If they remain silent, they might appear vulnerable but gain the trust they so desperately need. The narrative emphasizes the gravity of the moment, drawing a parallel to global leaders whose every word is scrutinized for meaning. The sense of inevitability grows, something must be said or not said, and the outcome will redefine everything. The leader is no longer just an individual, they are a symbol of the leadership they aspire to be. The pressure is a crucible, designed to burn away the excess and leave only the essential truth. As they reach for the handle of the door, the silence of the hallway feels like a premonition, a final moment of peace before the storm of the climax begins to break. The climax arrives not with a shout, but with the profound, resonant impact of a choice made in the heat of battle. The leader is in the room, the arguments are flying, and the tension is at its zenith. This is the moment where the always-talkative habit would normally take over. The leader has the perfect retort ready, the ultimate last word that would shut down the opposition and assert their dominance. It is a moment of intense emotional and intellectual pressure. But then, something changes. In a sequence that translates the original text's intensity into a gripping narrative peak, the leader chooses to do the one thing no one expects. They stay silent, they listen. They let the other person finish their thought, even if it is critical or flawed. They allow the silence to hang in the room, heavy and uncomfortable, but also full of possibility. This is the turning point, the realization that true power is not found in the ability to speak, but in the strength required to hold one's tongue. The transformation is immediate and visible. The room settles. The aggression of the others begins to dissipate, met with the immovable wall of the leader's composure. In this moment of clarity, the leader sees the situation for what it truly is: not a battle to be won, but a relationship to be salvaged. This revelation redefines the story's trajectory. The leader understands that by not saying the words that were on the tip of their tongue, they have preserved something much more valuable than their own ego. The consequence of this silence is a shift in the power dynamic. The leader is no longer just another voice in the fray, but the calm center around which the team can regroup. This happens everywhere, from boardrooms in England to community meetings in Latin America, the moment when a leader's restraint becomes their most powerful message. The climax ends with the leader finally speaking, but only after a long pause, and their words are not of critique, but of synthesis and understanding. The transition into the aftermath is marked by a sense of profound change, as the old way of leading is permanently left behind in the wake of this singular, decisive moment of silence. The immediate aftermath of the climax is characterized by a strange, newfound stillness. The room that was once filled with the clatter of ego and the heat of argument is now quiet, but it is a productive silence. The leader watches as the first wave of consequences begins to unfold. The people around the table, once defensive and guarded, begin to relax. There is a visible shift in their body language, shoulders drop, breaths are held less tightly, and the atmosphere of fear begins to evaporate. The leader feels the raw emotional impact of their decision. There is a sense of relief, but also a lingering weight. They realize just how close they came to causing irreparable damage. The silence they maintained has acted as a catalyst for a different kind of dialogue, one based on mutual respect rather than dominance. In the immediate wake of the event, the leader sees the first signs of a situational shift. A junior member of the team, who usually remains silent, feels empowered to offer a suggestion. A peer, who had been a frequent critic, offers a nod of acknowledgement. The leader takes a breath of space, allowing the weight of the events to settle within them. They are no longer the person who needs to fill every gap. They are the person who creates the gaps for others to fill. This pause is essential. It is the moment where the lesson truly takes root. The narrative captures the quiet power of this aftermath, showing that the most significant changes often happen in the quiet moments that follow a storm. The leader realizes that their silence was not a void but a foundation. They have discovered that by saying less, they have actually communicated more. The raw tension of the climax has been replaced by a nascent trust, a fragile but growing sense of unity that would have been impossible if the leader had insisted on having the last word. The aftermath is the first chapter of a new story, one where the leader's voice is used sparingly and therefore with much greater effect. The weight of the silence is no longer heavy, it is grounding. As the days and weeks pass, the deeper consequences of the leader's transformation begin to manifest. The resolution of the story is found in the long-term shifts in the organization's culture and the leader's own internal state. The transformation is both external and internal. Externally, the team becomes more proactive and innovative. Because they no longer fear the leader's constant critique or the sting of an ill-timed joke, they are more willing to take risks and share new ideas. The leader's silence has created a psychological safety that is the hallmark of all successful teams, whether in the American continent or in Europe. Internally, the leader experiences a profound settling of their own anxieties. They no longer feel the desperate need to prove their worth through constant speech. They have learned the lesson that their words carry more weight as they rise through the hierarchy, and they treat that power with the reverence it deserves. The central insight of the narrative, that the words which come out of a leader's mouth can often be their downfall, has been fully integrated into their daily life. They have adopted new habits like the sleep on it rule and the draft check for emails. These are not just productivity hacks, they are spiritual disciplines of leadership. The resolution is seen in the way the leader now handles conflict. They are no longer the first to speak, but the first to listen. They have learned that being negative or critical is often a choice made out of habit or ego, and they now choose a different path. This internal shift leads to a more harmonious professional and personal life. The narrative transitions naturally toward closure, as the leader reflects on the journey from being a person who always had something to say to being a person who always has something worth hearing. The transformation is complete, not because they have stopped speaking altogether, but because they have learned the true value of the silence that precedes and follows their words. The aftermath is a landscape of improved relationships and a more effective, inspired way of leading. Drawing together the various threads of this journey, we arrive at a synthesis of what it truly means to lead with wisdom. The narrative reflects on the broader thematic and philosophical significance of the path the leader has traveled. It is a journey from noise to meaning, from ego to service. The key takeaway is that leadership is as much about what is withheld as it is about what is given. The silence of a leader is not an absence of action, but a deliberate, strategic presence. It is the space where trust is built, where others are invited to grow, and where the most important truths can finally be heard. The synthesis of this experience highlights the paradox that the most influential voices are often those that speak the least. In the American continent, in England, or in Spain, the universal truth of leadership remains the same. The power of the voice is magnified by the restraint of the speaker. The story has shown that the impulse to always have the last word, to always correct, and to always fill the silence is a barrier to true connection. By overcoming this impulse, the leader has unlocked a new level of excellence. The broader philosophical implication is that self-mastery is the foundation of all other forms of leadership. One cannot lead others effectively if they cannot lead their own impulses. This reflection illuminates the idea that every word spoken is a choice that shapes the world. The leader has learned to distribute praise quickly and accusations slowly, a principle that applies as much to the home as it does to the boardroom. The thematic threads of the narrative, the weight of hierarchy, the danger of digital impulsivity, and the art of the measured response, all converge into a coherent understanding of the leader as a guardian of communication. The journey has been one of refining the arsenal of tools available to the leader, ensuring that no advantage is underutilized and no weakness is allowed to hinder progress. This resonant idea prepares the listener for the final message, that the most successful leaders are those who have learned when it is time to be silent, and when their voice can truly change the world. In the final reflection, the essence of the leader's journey is distilled into a cohesive and emotionally satisfying closure. The story ends not with a grand proclamation, but with a quiet, powerful image of a leader who is at peace with their own voice. They have come to understand that their thoughts, actions, and words throughout their life have all been preparation for this level of excellence. The lesson is clear. Success in leadership is not about the volume of one's speech, but about the depth of one's restraint and the quality of one's listening. The philosophy that has emerged is one of intentionality. A leader must be the master of their words, not a slave to their impulses. This realization leaves the listener with a sense of clarity and contemplation. The broader meaning of the chapter and the book it comes from is that leadership is a journey of continuous self-improvement, a process of shedding old habits that no longer serve the mission and adopting new ones that empower others. The final message is one of inspiration, that anyone, regardless of their role or location, whether they are managing a household in Latin America or a global bank in Europe, can become the kind of leader others admire and want to follow. This is achieved through the simple but profound act of knowing when to stay silent. The narrative concludes with the idea that the greatest leaders are remembered not for the arguments they won, but for the people they inspired and the space they created for others to shine. The silence of the leader is their most eloquent speech, a testament to their respect for those they lead and their commitment to a higher standard of excellence. As the story closes, the listener is left to reflect on their own words and the silences they choose to keep. The legacy of a successful leader is built in the quiet moments of restraint, in the emails not sent in anger, and in the critiques replaced by encouragement. It is a path of wisdom that leads to a more fulfilling and impactful life, both for the leader and for all those whose lives they touch.